Well, the sun is rising in Bethel, Alaska. That's sort of in some wilderness part in the western part of the mainland, before not really the Aleutian Islands. What can I say? I'm well rested, energetic, ready for a busy week. I actually got woken up by an alarm clock today, which maybe make me seem a little less insane, not waking up at 4:30 or so as I usually do, but around 6:30 this morning, there was no sunrise report. I had to get a few things together, and I'm only getting around to it now. But realistically, were any of you really depending on me for your French election coverage? I don't think so. If so, we should probably talk. There are certain things I do and certain things I don't do. My main priority, by the way, is not this. It is Shark Nation Radio, which is now over a week old. You can look at it on, I think SoundCloud is the best way. You can't really look at it. You can hear it there, but there's not much to look at, other than me. You can watch videos on YouTube. There are good clips on there. Facebook, Twitter. It's not me doing this. I have actually a production team this time, which is a first step, a good, useful production team, and they're doing a great job. You can download the app on Android or for Apple. There's probably something else I'm forgetting. You can just go to the website. All that is good. Hey, okay, but yeah, the New World Order, Deep State, whatever candidate, Emmanuel Macron won big. Le Pen didn't win. How should we feel? I don't know. As a French person, I'd probably be upset. Jewish people, there's some questions there who we should have wanted to win. If your primary question is he or she good for the Jews? We'll get to that in a second. For me, the takeaway is, again, 45 without children. I'm not necessarily one to talk. I would like to get married. Again, I had a quick marriage, divorced, no children. I've mentioned that often enough. I hate to have to keep mentioning that, so I'm not, trying to be a hypocrite. But now both Germany and France will be led by childless people, and people who basically have never even been in the situation where they were trying to have kids and could not. And I feel sorry for those people, obviously. But no, this is a situation where in Germany, Merkel, I don't think, ever got married, and so she sees the Muslim migrants as her children. Obviously not children of white farmers in South Africa. Those could never be her type of children, so to speak. And France, a situation in which children were not likely because his wife is 25 years older than he is. Go figure, but she was not going to have children. She has children. I think one of them is even older than he is. So it's an interesting situation, but the real thing I want to mention is it's a metaphor for Europe today, in which Native Europeans simply do not have children at a replacement level, not even close. There's a metaphor there. Meanwhile, they're importing Muslims who are very fecund and Africans who are very, is that the word fecund, F-E-C-U-N-D? I don't know it well. I know what it means, but I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. So you can read into that what you want. I was talking with David Goldman about Israel Independence Day last week, and we were talking, this was on Shark Nation Radio, about how Israel is the only country that could even be considered white. Whether you want to consider Jews, especially Sephardic Jews, white is another story, but they are having a lot of children there. And I think, to bring up something that, to paraphrase or borrow from something Mark Stein said, do you feel more confident about the future of the Lebanese people or the French or German people? Certainly. Which do you think will have more of a future? France as we know it, Germany as we know it, or Israel as we know it? Realistically, I mean, the Iranian nukes aside, obviously Lebanon means something different than it meant in the past, because those were not Arab countries in the past. But do we really see France run by French people as having a future? I don't think so. Now, one thing from the Jewish standpoint, Le Pen's father was not a big fan of Jews. Who knows what she really thinks? She's talked about how she should ban kosher slaughter, and we've had some interesting debates. The rabbi said Israel is probably not pleased with the result, for the reason that the Jews are going to move, the Jews in France are eventually going to have to move to Israel, basically. And whether it will be done in a quick process, which might have been the case with Le Pen, or in a slow process, which might have been the case with Macron, as it just gradually becomes more New World Order-y, as it becomes more EU-y. That is an interesting question. Who knows? But certainly the Muslims are going to keep coming in. He played the EU anthem, Ode to Joy by Beethoven. I'm not sure Beethoven would have been so into that. That is the EU anthem. That was what was played when he was one, so I've heard. And it's just interesting. And hopefully people will stop. I hate when people say, oh, we went to Paris. It's so romantic. I hate especially when Jewish people do it. Look, go to Israel. That's our place on a vacation. You know, you sound cheesy when you're talking about Paris as if it's like the 1920s or something after World War I, when a lot of American farm boys were discovering it for the first time. So who knows? Look, the French have been subtly hating the Jewish people and Americans for a long time now. I'm talking about not the ones who work with their hands in the country, but the Parisians in particular. We know what happened in Germany, though. I will mention that what happened, like a third of the population actually voted for Hitler, and then the rest of the population was terrorized into supporting him. I know the facts on the ground there. I'm not getting into that right now. And I will point out, by the way, Paris, which suffered the worst terrorist attacks of all, and I imagine a lot of them were in the crowd at Nice that got hit with the really bad terrorist attack. In Paris, 90% of the people voted for Macron. That's a vote for bringing in a lot more Muslims, a lot more EUization. So obviously it didn't bother them that much. Bataclan, that horrible terrorist attack where so many changed their profile picture in response over here, apparently didn't bother them that much, because Le Pen, whether she was good for the Jews or not, was clearly the more nationalistic candidate. Now, I was thinking about this because I was reading really kind of randomly. I've been reading it. I just happened to pick it. Someone mentioned something about Oklahoma. I was thinking about Okies, and I thought about the Grapes of Wrath and just picked it up a few weeks ago, and I've really been enjoying it. John Steinbeck is a socialist, and I think the workers he was concerned with when he talked about the workers actually were workers, like in canneries, etc., as opposed to what people in Antifa refer to as workers. Now, he was talking about workers. Brilliant writer, whether you approve of his politics or not, though obviously things were different. And in chapter 19 and chapter 21, which I was reading on Saturday, he just has some great points that are relevant to Europe of today. He's talking about how a lot of people in the small towns out in California were insecure because of this onslaught of what they called Okies, the people in Oklahoma who had owned farms that had been devastated by the Dust Bowls and just the changes in ownership, that the banks were taking over the banks, tractoring over the old houses, and it was no longer going to be the time for single-family farms just supporting themselves, and they were hungry. And he brought into that how hungry people will work for less, and it could mess things up. They were essentially like refugees, real refugees, not necessarily Muslims and Africans just saying, hey, Europe's paying all this welfare, let's take advantage of it, which to me is a lot of the mindset there. But I want to just read you this one part. It's in my edition, which is this one. Can you see it okay? Pages 236, 237. I imagine it's chapter 19 in all editions. Here's an interesting point about what, the conflict between people in, I guess, California, who were already there, had a good thing going. It wasn't too overpopulated then. Certainly not like the California of today. We're talking California of the 30s. Here's something about how to deal with these Okies, these very poor by the Dust Bowl former farmers who had some pride, but really were going through some bad times and were going to mess things up for the Californians, or so they thought. I'll just read you this. Rattlesnakes. Don't take chances with them, and if they argue, shoot first. If a kid'll kill a cop, what'll the men do? Thing is, get tougher than they are. Treat them rough. Scare them. What if they won't scare? What if they stand up and take it and shoot back? These men were armed when they were children. A gun is an extension of themselves. What if they're saying, he's saying how tough these people were. What if they won't scare? What if sometime an army of them marches on the land as the Lombards did in Italy, as the Germans did on Gaul? Funny how he mentions the Germans on Gaul. That's the old Germany and France. The Germanic people are very ancient people. The French, by the way, are more a combination of Celtic, Roman, and Germanic. So they're not quite as ancient in people, but obviously France goes back a long way, and it's basically over for France and Germany. Who are we kidding at this point? But more so, Germany has a longer history, or at least the German peoples do, as the Germans did on Gaul and the Turks did on Byzantium. They were land-hungry, ill-armed hordes too, and the legions could not stop them. Now, compare the Africans and Muslims or Muslims, a lot of the Africans are Muslims, coming in, probably most of them are, coming into Europe now. Compare them and how hungry they are, desperate, and probably more ruthless, to the effete Emmanuel Macron types that are basically the elite of Western Europe today. Steinbeck goes on, slaughter and terror did not stop them. How can you frighten a man whose hunger is not only in his own cramped stomach, but in the wretched bellies of his children? Frankly, I don't think the so-called migrants in Europe have it quite that bad. They lust for what Europe has, and I use the term lust non-accidentally, but that's not the only thing, obviously, the European women. It means a few things, even if they're not necessarily starving. Certainly not the Muslims, Arab Muslims who are coming in. Not only in his own cramped stomach, but in the wretched bellies of his children. You can't scare him. He has known a fear beyond every other. So that's one interesting part. Peggy McGuckin Smith, like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. I think that's from Psalms. She just posted that up there. Yeah, I'm aware of that. And believe me, let's help me find a lady who's my future so we can do some of that on this end. But thanks for reminding me there, Peggy. I just want to read you one thing in the notes section here. I wrote where it was. It's a footnote to chapter 21, not long after. Let me just find where this is in here. By the way, if you want to read a book, this is very good, but I really want to encourage people to read something by Herman Wouk. And I'll be doing stuff on here with that. Herman Wouk turns 102 at the end of May, toward the end of May. And, I'm going to do a lot with Marjorie Morningstar talking about it. It's a good book to pick up, and he has some short ones, too. The Winds of War and Remembrance are great, but there are 2,000 pages between them. Here's a paragraph in chapter 21 that I also think is relevant, and then I'll get to the footnote, which is really relevant there. And then suddenly the machines push them out. They're talking about the small farmers in places like Oklahoma and to some extent Kansas, but the main characters here are from Oklahoma. And then suddenly the machines pushed them out and they swarmed on the highways. The movement changed them. The highways, the camps along the road, the fear of hunger and the hunger itself changed them. The children without dinner changed them. The endless moving changed them. They were migrants, and the hostility changed them, welded them, united them. Hostility that made the little towns group and arm as though to repel an invader. Squads with pick handles, clerks, and storekeepers with shotguns, guarding the world against their own people. Now the note that he has to that, I want to read you. Steinbeck writes this note, and I thought this was good. A long note, but it's worthwhile. In the typescript, this was followed by a paragraph Steinbeck later eliminated. And this is particularly relevant because we're talking about the Germans, and what applies to the Germans really applies to the French now. Once the Germans, in their hordes, came to the rich margin of Rome, and they came timidly, saying, "We have been driven, give us land." And the Romans armed the frontier and built forts against the hordes of need. And the legions patrolled the borders, cased in metal, armed with the best steel. And the barbarians came naked across the border, humbly. They received the swords in their breasts and marched on. And their dead bore down the swords, and the barbarians marched on and took the land. And they were driven by their need, and they conquered with their need. In battle, the women fought in the line, and the yellow-haired children lay in the grass, with knives to hamstring the legionnaires, to snick through the hamstrings of the horses. But the legions had no needs, no wills, no force, and the best trained, best armed troops in the world went down before the hordes of need. So that's just a little something interesting and relevant from the Grapes of Wrath. Just one point I forgot to mention, I saw a story today. I don't know how credible it is. I'm sure the mainstream types would say, oh, fake news, but I just don't know. But it talks about how the leaks, WikiLeaks has confirmed a lot of the emails that of Macron's that did not make it to the French public before the election, talking about drug use, homosexual activity, and other stuff that, I guess we might expect of the elite in the EU, that type. Nothing of it would surprise me. There's something so eerie about this guy Macron, his rise, the wife 25 years older. Could that be a beard? I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things. I'm just trying to point you to that information. Maybe I'll link that story right now. Thank you for watching.